The applause was the worst part. Not the betrayal. Not the messages. Not even the smirk on Avery's face when she saw me standing there in the doorway. No, it was the applause. Imagine walking into a rooftop cocktail party because your wife texted you, "Come now, emergency." And the first thing you hear is 50 people clapping like you're a magician who just disappeared. That's what happened to me. I pushed open the glass door of some high-rise lounge I'd never been to, and there she was, on a stage-like platform near the bar. Avery, my wife of 7 years, holding a microphone, champagne glass raised. She was radiant, like she'd just won an award. Around her, colleagues and friends I barely recognized stood in a loose circle, grinning like they were in on a joke. And then she said it, into the mic, smiling at me. If you disappeared, no one would notice. Laughter. Real, unfiltered laughter. Someone whistled. Someone even shouted, "Challenge accepted," like it was a game. I froze. I don't even remember setting my coat down. I just remember my hands shaking. My phone almost slipped out. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a private jab taken out of context. This was public. Planned. She tilted her head at me, not embarrassed, not apologetic. Just curious, like a cat testing a bug. "Wes," she said into the mic. "Tell them how invisible you've been feeling lately." More laughter. Glasses clinking. Cameras flashing. And I stood there, a man-shaped object, my heart pounding loud enough to drown the music. I didn't say a word. I just turned, walked back through the glass door, down the stairwell instead of the elevator, and out into the rain. And that's when I realized she'd wanted me to show up. Not to save me. Not to humiliate me once. But to give me a push. A push toward what? I didn't know yet. But as the applause echoed down those stairwell walls, one thought landed in my chest like a stone. If she wanted me gone so badly, I'd give her a disappearance she'd never forget. And so it began. I didn't go home that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that if I did, I'd give her what she wanted. A confrontation. A meltdown. Proof that her little performance had landed. And I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the 24-hour laundromat 2 blocks from my old high school. It smelled like bleach and broken dreams, but it was quiet, and the flickering fluorescent lights matched the static in my chest. I sat in the car for 2 hours with the engine off, just listening to the ticking of the dashboard and staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror like I didn't recognize the man looking back. She used to say I was too emotionally available, that I felt everything too loudly. I thought that was supposed to be a good thing, being soft in a hard world. Turns out, softness makes for great sport when someone's bored and cruel. By 3 a.m., I'd made a decision. Not a plan, not yet, but a decision. If Avery truly believed that no one would notice if I disappeared, then I would show her what that looked like. Not the dramatic kind of disappearance. No running away to the woods. No faking my death. Just subtraction. A slow, calculated erasure of myself from her life. From everyone's. The first step? Stop talking. That morning, I went home at sunrise. The apartment was still and sterile. Our cat, Rizzo, meowed once and walked away, like he, too, had given up on me. I showered, dressed, made coffee, and didn't say a word when Avery came out of the bedroom in one of my old t-shirts, acting like the rooftop humiliation hadn't happened. She was on her phone, already replying to some email, already moving past it. "You're up early," she said with a casual glance. "Everything okay?" I stared at her for a beat too long, then nodded once and turned back to the sink. She didn't notice the silence. She just accepted it, like she accepted most things, easily, selfishly. That was the confirmation I needed. Over the next week, I began peeling back from everything. I left work early and didn't tell her. I stopped restocking her almond milk or folding her yoga mats or texting her back. When she invited me to her coworker's housewarming, I said I had a client call, and instead sat in the parking garage, watching people come and go, wondering how many of them were secretly running from their lives, too. It wasn't just about Avery anymore. It was about realizing how much of myself I had hollowed out to fit inside someone else's idea of love, and how little space she'd left for the real me. The kind that writes stupid poems in his phone drafts. The kind that remembers anniversaries even when the other person forgets. The kind that makes extra breakfast, just in case. She didn't deserve it. She hadn't in a long time. And yet, even as I distanced myself, I kept watching her, closely. Because something about that rooftop party still didn't sit right. Who throws a line like that to a crowd? Who sets up a moment like that unless they're trying to push someone over the edge? That's when I remembered. Avery had always been a strategist. Back in grad school, she used to design these brutal escape room scenarios for fun, psychological puzzles that preyed on your blind spots. She once trapped a team of 4 for 90 minutes because she hid the key inside a fake vent and distracted them with fake clues. She loved watching people spiral. What if that's what she was doing to me? What if this was her game? To provoke me into leaving so she could play the victim, wipe her hands clean, and start over without the guilt. If that was the plan, she'd made one miscalculation. I don't spiral. I vanish. The deeper I pulled away, the more she seemed to flourish. That was the strange part. Avery began dressing sharper, leaving earlier, laughing louder, posting photos again, curated, careful shots of her cocktails, shoes, and skyline views. None with me, of course. Her captions were always vague and solo-coded. New chapters are better with no bookmarks. Learning to love silence. Energy shift. Anyone else scrolling her page would have thought she was glowing up after a breakup. Except we hadn't broken up. I was still right there. In the same apartment. Breathing the same air. Sleeping in the same bed, even if we never touched anymore. But while she was building a fantasy life online, I was digging through the bones of the real one she left behind. I started with the closet. Not metaphorically. Literally. I waited until she was at one of her Pilates and Prosecco nights. Yes, that's a real thing in her world. And pulled down the box labeled wedding stuff from the top shelf. It was dusty, unopened since we moved in. Inside were the usual things: cards, photos, old invitations, a dried flower crown she wore at the bachelorette weekend. But wedged between 2 albums was something I'd never seen before. A smaller box, matte black, unmarked. It was locked. Not with a key, a digital lock, like one of those fingerprint-secure diary boxes. Expensive. New. Why hide that inside wedding memories? Why lock it at all? That's when I remembered something small but useful. The scanner app she once forced me to install on her old phone. The one she never deactivated. She hated the new phone's UI, so she still used the old one for notes and apps, and sometimes left it charging in her office, out of sight. When she came home that night, flushed and tipsy, I greeted her in the kitchen with soft eyes and asked if she wanted pancakes. She blinked, confused by the sudden warmth, but nodded. Yeah, actually, that'd be nice. While the batter sizzled, she sat on the couch scrolling and laughing at her phone. I watched her reflection in the microwave door. She didn't suspect a thing. Because for the first time in weeks, I was present again. I gave her syrup. I gave her sweetness. I gave her exactly what she thought she wanted. And the next morning, while she showered, I took the old phone out of the drawer, bypassed the screen lock she never updated, and opened the fingerprint app she used to manage digital locks. There it was, a stored connection. Box #3A1F, widow. Widow? The name was chilling. I copied the fingerprint to my own phone using the backup sync tool she forgot to disable. Easy, quiet, clean. I didn't open the box right away. That would have been too impulsive. I waited 2 days. Let the tension marinate. Watched her closely. She didn't flinch once. So the night I finally opened it, I was prepared for, I don't know, letters? Love notes? Maybe even something from before me. An old flame she hadn't let go of. But what I found inside was worse. Photos. Hundreds of them. Of me. Sleeping. Shaving. Reading. Standing at the sink. In the garage. On the balcony. On the train platform. From angles that didn't make sense. Low, distant, grainy. Photos I hadn't taken. Photos she never should have had. Some were old. Years ago, judging by the shirt I hadn't worn since 2020. Others were recent. Too recent. From locations I'd been alone in. Or thought I had been. And underneath all of them, taped to the bottom of the box, was a folded piece of paper. Not handwritten. Typed. In Courier. And it read, "He won't notice the net until he's already tangled." That's when it hit me. I hadn't been disappearing. She'd been watching. Cataloging. Preparing. And I had just stepped into the trap I thought I was building for her. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Avery, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breath rise and fall like nothing in the world was wrong. Occasionally, she'd twitch or shift in her sleep, but her peace was unbroken. That was the part that drove me insane. How could someone sleep so soundly with that kind of box hidden in our closet? I wanted to wake her up and scream. Demand answers. Ask why she'd been tracking me like some case study, documenting every movement like I was part of an experiment. But I didn't. Because in the silence between those breaths, I started to realize something else. She wasn't documenting me out of obsession. She was profiling me. It wasn't just the angles of the photos or the timestamps. It was the pattern, the way they were organized, the repetition, the labels on the folders inside the drive I hadn't noticed at first. Each album had a title: restless behavior, withdrawal phase, adaptive routine. They sounded clinical, cold, like someone was building a psychological profile, not of a husband, of a subject. That thought chilled me to the bone. The next morning, I played normal. I complimented her new blouse. I made her coffee and even offered to drop her off at work, which she politely declined like always. I've got an early call, babe. Don't stress it. She kissed me on the cheek. Casual, light, rehearsed. And when she walked out the door, I watched from the second-floor hallway window as she turned the corner, not toward the office, but 2 blocks down, into the same gray sedan I'd seen once before. It wasn't an Uber. It was too familiar, too fast. That night, I waited for her return. She was later than usual. No explanation. Just an exhausted sigh, a tossed purse, and a half-hearted, long day. Let's not talk. And I agreed. Because I wasn't planning to talk. I was planning to leave. Not forever, not yet. Just long enough to flip the script. By the next morning, I was gone. I packed only what I needed: phone, laptop, cash, and the photos from the box. I left my ring on the nightstand and my phone charging next to the bed, fully wiped except for one thing. A single note in the memo app: if you disappeared, no one would notice. Challenge accepted. Then I drove to my cousin Malachi's cabin upstate. Isolated. Off-grid. The kind of place without neighbors for 3 miles in any direction. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but the place was still in the family. Still had a key hidden under the busted fence post, just like we'd promised as kids. There was no signal, no cameras, just wood, fog, and silence. And for the first time in weeks, I breathed. Not deeply, not peacefully, but on my own terms. The first 3 days, I did nothing but think. Piece things together. Connect dots that never made sense until now. Like the time she encouraged me to share personal stories, deep stories, and had followed up with bizarre questions. Would you ever run away? What would your perfect crime be? Do you ever feel like you're just a character in someone else's story? They seemed cute at the time. Playful. I'd laugh them off. Now I wasn't so sure. Because this didn't feel like an affair. It didn't feel like the kind of betrayal where someone checks out emotionally, meets someone new, and slips away. No. This felt orchestrated. Intentionally layered. Like I was being conditioned to vanish. And the more I considered it, the more I realized. Maybe she didn't want to destroy me. Maybe she wanted to study what would happen when I destroyed myself. But what she hadn't planned for, what her neat little folders and data sets didn't account for, was this. I wasn't spiraling. I was watching her now. And I had something she didn't expect. Time. The first week in the cabin was a test of who I was without noise. There was no Wi-Fi, no phone signal, and no other heartbeat but mine. Just the creak of the old porch boards, the hiss of the wind through the pines, and the smell of wet wood. In the beginning, the silence hurt, like holding your breath underwater until your lungs burn. Then, slowly, the ache turned into clarity. The longer I sat with it, the clearer the edges of everything became. I could see how my life with Avery had narrowed over the years, how her constant questioning had pushed me to give away little pieces of myself until there was almost nothing left to defend. I could also see how deliberate her pattern had been. Public humiliation, private surveillance, calculated withdrawal. It wasn't an accident. She was writing a story, and I was supposed to be the ending. I started writing too. Not texts, not emails. Pages. Dozens of them. I wrote down every question she had asked me over the past 2 years, every time she had forgotten to invite me to something, every moment where she had tried to get me to reveal what I would do if left alone. The pattern was unmistakable when you saw it lined up on paper. And yet, buried in those notes, something else appeared. The name on the black box app wasn't random. Widow. It wasn't a pet name. It wasn't a joke. It was the title of a project. A research file. She had been running a case study on me, building a profile of what it would take to make an ordinary man disappear without touching him. That's when the idea hit me. If she was turning me into a case study, then I would give her a subject she couldn't predict. I would not explode. I would not leave a dramatic note or beg for her to understand. Instead, I would become the opposite of her data, unpredictable, deliberate, and watching her right back. She thought she was cataloging my disappearance. In reality, she had already given me the blueprint for hers. I spent the next few days setting traps of my own. Before leaving the apartment, I had left a duplicate of the black box in the closet, empty except for a cheap voice-activated recorder hidden under the lining. If she opened it after finding my ring and the memo on the phone, she would assume I'd taken everything. She wouldn't see the recorder. She would speak freely. She would reveal who the man in the gray sedan was, who she was reporting to, why she needed me gone. All I had to do was stay quiet long enough for her to incriminate herself. Every night at the cabin, I imagined her reaction when she realized I wasn't reacting. No screaming, no chasing, no begging. Just a blank space where a husband used to be. I could almost feel her pacing our apartment, trying to decide if she should call me, or call whoever was in the gray car. The image of her perfect control cracking kept me warm at night better than the old wood stove. On the fourth night, I drove back to town, parked behind the grocery store, and used the pay phone, an actual pay phone, the last one in the county, to call my old coworker Cal. He owed me a favor. Cal didn't know anything about Avery's project, but he knew about surveillance gear. With his help, by the end of the week, I would have a new SIM, a signal scrambler, and a way to pull the data from the hidden recorder without stepping foot inside the apartment. I wasn't just running anymore. I was building something. As the plan took shape, I realized something strange was happening inside me. The self-pity, the constant inner monologue of, why me? Why does she treat me like this? It was going quiet. In its place, a different kind of focus. Not revenge. Not even anger. Strategy. For the first time in years, my life didn't orbit around Avery's moods. For the first time in years, I was the one designing the game. And that terrified me, because if I could do it, it meant she had been right about one thing. I was capable of disappearing. Only not in the way she wanted. Not as a subject in her study. Not as a man erased. As a man who could erase her story instead. When I finally accessed the audio files from the bug box, my hands shook. I was alone in the cabin again, staring at a laptop screen, headphones wrapped around my ears like they were holding my skull together. The signal was clean. Cal had done good work. What I didn't expect was how fast she opened the box. Barely a day after I'd left, she'd gone for it. Like she couldn't wait to confirm I was finally gone. The first 30 seconds were silent, just the faint creak of the closet floor and what I assume was her breath. Calm, steady, not a trace of grief. Then she exhaled a dry laugh. A very specific kind of laugh. Not relief. Not sadness. Satisfaction. And then she spoke. And just like that, subject exited. Clean detachment. No confrontation. Her voice was soft, almost clinical. No performance. No attempt to narrate for anyone else. That's when I knew. She wasn't making videos. She wasn't blogging. She wasn't reporting to some research firm. She was doing this for herself. She continued talking like she was dictating to an invisible recorder, completely unaware that one was actually listening. Phase 3 complete. Passive erasure confirmed. Total compliance. Emotional withdrawal achieved without direct manipulation after social destabilization. Every word tightened something behind my ribs. Control group was right. Visibility degradation sets in faster after public embarrassment. The rooftop was more effective than anticipated. Time to close this out before variables reintroduce. Remove lingering connections. Secure phone records. Review footage. Clean exit. She paused. Widow file, day 174. 174 days. That meant this had started almost 6 months ago. Way before the party. Way before the box. Way before I even noticed. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted to study what it took to make someone willingly erase themselves and document the descent. But I wasn't gone. And I wasn't erasing myself. I was about to become her variable. Over the next 2 days, I began laying groundwork. Carefully, quietly. I printed every transcript of her monologue, indexed them, and created a separate file, Observer Notes. I wanted a record of what she had done, something no one could ignore or twist in a hearsay. Then I reached out to someone I never thought I'd involve. Jonah, her ex. We'd never spoken directly. He was one of those names that lingered in the background early in our marriage. always mentioned with an edge of "he wasn't right for me" energy. But Jonah was smart, a data analyst who now worked freelance with a few connections in behavioral security consulting. The kind of guy who knows what visibility degradation means in context. When I called from a borrowed number and said, "This is Wes, Avery's husband," there was a pause. Then he said, very quietly, "I wondered when I'd hear from you." That sentence hit like a hammer. He told me things I can't even verify yet. Things about Avery's thesis project in grad school, about her obsession with behavioral compliance and psychological reward systems, about how she had run an emotional extraction simulation using personal partners, romantic partners, as unknowing participants. He had been one of them. So had someone else, a woman I'd never heard of. Both of them left with symptoms of prolonged dissociation, anxiety, and in Jonah's case, a brief hospitalization. She had told me he was too intense, that he couldn't handle honesty. But now I was starting to see the truth. She didn't break up with Jonah because he was weak. She abandoned him because he started asking the wrong questions. And now I had one more reason to believe she had picked me for a purpose. Not because I was weak, but because I could vanish without making a scene. I ended the call with Jonah by saying only this: "I'm going to finish the study for her, but I'll be the one writing the conclusion." That night, I opened a new document titled Reversal Protocol. It began with a sentence I never thought I'd write. "She thinks I'm gone. That's good. Now I can start erasing her." For 3 weeks, I let her believe I'd dissolved. I stayed upstate, living off instant coffee and cheap canned food, checking the audio feed every night like it was a confessional. Avery spoke less and less as the days went by. The first few entries were brisk, confident, clinical. By the end of the second week, the tone cracked. She stopped speaking in sentences and started muttering. Little phrases, like a teacher marking a test that didn't make sense anymore. Unexpected latency, non-compliant withdrawal, phase integrity compromised. It was the first time her voice trembled. She was losing her control, and she didn't even know why. That's when I started slipping my own signals back into her world. Tiny, deliberate glitches. A call to her work phone that hung up after one ring. An email to her private account with no subject and only a single period in the body. A book she thought she'd lost, the one about maze design and human cognition, left in the middle of the kitchen table with a fresh coffee stain. Each move small enough to be deniable, but odd enough to feel like a fingerprint. I wasn't just disappearing anymore. I was haunting her data set, a variable that refused to stay clean. The change was immediate. She stopped posting online. She started arriving home earlier, pulling the curtains shut, checking the locks twice. The audio feed caught her whispering into the phone, "No, he's gone. I'm sure. He's gone. He's gone." Over and over, like a prayer she didn't believe. In the background, I could hear the TV playing one of those looping meditation tracks she hated. She was unraveling inside her own lab. And the whole time I kept writing. My reversal protocol became 100 pages. It wasn't just a diary anymore. It was a blueprint, a counter-experiment. Every note she'd taken on me, I had on her. Every pattern she'd mapped, I inverted. Every trick she'd used to isolate me, I turned outward until she was the one isolated in her apartment, staring at shadows and silence, wondering if she was being studied too. By the third week, I had more than notes. I had proof. The recorder had captured her naming names. The gray sedan belonged to a contract investigator she'd hired under an alias. The funding for the widow file came from a grant she'd gotten under false pretenses, a private foundation interested in behavioral disengagement. She'd told them I was a volunteer, that I'd signed a consent form. She even described the rooftop humiliation as an escalation trigger. I wasn't just her husband. I was her experiment, and she had cashed a check to make it happen. That was the moment the self-pity burned out of me completely. It wasn't just about heartbreak anymore. It wasn't about revenge. It was about getting my life back from a person who had turned me into data. So I built my last move. I didn't go to the police, not yet. I didn't go to a lawyer, not yet. Instead, I went to someone she would never expect, her supervisor at the foundation. I packaged everything, the transcripts, the recordings, the photos, the grant application, the forged consent form, and sent it from a burner account with one line. You might want to review your principal investigator's ethics protocols before the subject files a complaint. Then I waited. The audio from the box picked up her panic before I saw any email bounce backs. One night she came home and tore the closet apart, muttering, "No, no, no," like a scratched record. Papers fluttered. The box hit the floor. For the first time since I'd known her, Avery cried. Not pretty tears, but the kind of guttural sound you make when a door slams shut on a future you thought you owned. I could have stopped there. That was already more than enough. But as I sat in the cabin with the lights off, listening to her world collapse through a tinny speaker, I realized the most shocking thing of all. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt free, like a ghost who'd finally remembered he had a body. That's when I knew the study was over, not because she said so, but because I had ended it. And for the first time, I thought about going home. I came back on a Tuesday, quietly. No dramatic doorstep moment. No bags dropped in the hallway. I didn't even go straight to the apartment. I just walked the city for hours, a free man in the same streets where I once felt invisible. Funny how the world looks different when you're no longer trying to be seen. I passed people laughing at cafe tables, couples fighting by crosswalks, a guy on a bench crying over something on his phone. Life went on. No applause. No cameras. And I liked it that way. When I finally went up to the apartment, it was empty. Not cleaned out, just quiet. Like someone had stepped out and left their life mid-sentence. Her purse was gone. The closets were open. My ring was still on the nightstand where I'd left it, untouched. She hadn't thrown it away. But she hadn't moved it either. A letter waited for me on the table. Handwritten. The only real thing she'd given me in months. Wes, I don't know what I expected. Maybe I thought you'd yell. Maybe I thought you'd break. But you didn't. You vanished like I predicted, and then you did something I never saw coming. You made me disappear. You flipped the whole thing upside down. You studied me. I can't undo what I did. But I can give you back one thing I took, the last word. I've withdrawn from the program. I've told the foundation everything. I'll face the consequences. I'm sorry. Not in the clean, sterile way people say sorry when they want to be forgiven. Just in the messy way people say it when they know it's too late. Hey, I stood there for a long time holding that letter, unsure what to feel. Rage? Relief? Regret? It was all there, tangled together. But something had shifted. The part of me that wanted answers, justice, pain, it had gotten what it needed. Not revenge, just the truth. I didn't try to call her. Instead, I went into the bedroom, packed a small bag, and walked out. I rented a month-to-month studio across town, something small, sunlit, with creaky floors and a stubborn radiator. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. I started journaling again, not for data, not for tracking behavior, just for me. I read fiction for the first time in years. I applied for a new job with a different company, one that didn't have any connection to her. I started running, badly, and every evening I walked past a bookstore with a sign in the window that read, "Your next chapter is waiting." I like that. The nights are still quiet. Sometimes too quiet. There are moments when I think I see her reflection in a window or hear her laugh in the hum of a passing train. But they fade. They always fade. And I let them. I'm not broken. I'm not erased. And I didn't disappear. She did. And what she left behind wasn't a wreck. It was a man rebuilding, one slow, stubborn, hopeful brick at a time. The study is over. The story is mine again.